Good afternoon and welcome to the International Human Rights Day event sponsored by our Student Wellness Office at the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. My name is Lynn Roberts and I am the Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Alumni Relations. I'm so pleased you're able to join us this afternoon. I'd like to make a few acknowledgements that this event, next slide please, John, is co-sponsored by the Sexual and Reproductive Rights, Health and Justice Club, also of the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. And we are also going to be joined this afternoon by faculty representatives of the specialization in maternal, child, reproductive, and sexual health, as well as the Masters of Science in Global and Migrant Health Policy program. Again, I'll review some of the housekeeping again. This is being recorded. You can change your pronouns if you so choose, and you can turn on or turn off closed captioning if it's not already appearing on your screen. Next slide, please. So what is Human Rights Day? This is an observance every year on the 10th of December, and it was established by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948 on the anniversary of the 1948 adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This declaration is a milestone document that proclaims the inalienable rights which everyone is entitled to as a human being, regardless of their race, their color, their religion, sex, language, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. It is available in more than 500 languages, and it is the most translated document in the world. A link to this document will be made available to you in the chat. Next slide, please. So it is also important to point out that this year's theme for Human Rights Day is Recover Better and Stand Up for Human Rights. This theme, of course, relates to the COVID-19 pandemic and focuses on the need to build back better by ensuring human rights are central to our recovery efforts. Next slide, please. So it gives me great privilege and honor that our guest speaker for today is Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who is the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health. At its 44th session in July of this year, the United Nations Human Rights Council appointed Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng from South Africa as its Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Tlaleng Mofokeng is a medical doctor with expertise advocating for universal health access, HIV care, youth-friendly services, and family planning, among many other things. Dr. Mofokeng is commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality in South Africa and member of the boards of Safe Abortion Action Fund, Global Advisory Board for Sexual Health and Wellbeing, Accountability International. She is also the chair of the Soul City Institute Board. She has experience in advocacy training for healthcare professionals, and her area of focus has been on gender equality, policy, maternal and neonatal health, universal health access, post-violence care, menstrual health, and HIV management. Dr. Mofokeng has been advisor to the Technical Committee for the National Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Framework Strategy in South Africa, successfully mobilizing across movements, working on issues of children and adolescents, persons with disabilities, migrants, and persons living with HIV and AIDS. She has briefed the United States Senate congressional staff on the impact of the global Gag Rule globally and in the region. And she has worked as a first responder on matters of gender-based violence and has been an expert witness in court, leading on the work of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, to defend the rights of the abused with an interest to ensure access to post-violence care. I invited Dr. Mofokeng to join us on this Human Rights Day 2020 because of her vast experience and also this special appointment as the rapporteur. I will also be posting in the chat some information about her mandate in this office, as well as the, as I said, the theme and how that relates to this year's theme for International Human Rights Day. Because of this being a very busy day for her, not only is it Human Rights Day, which you can imagine she'd be in high demand across the world to give talks, it is also her son's birthday. So she was not able to join us in person today, but she and I had an opportunity to speak this past Monday morning, 7:30 my time, 2:30 in the afternoon her time. And that talk was recorded. So we were going to share her talk. It's about a 20-minute presentation, not quite yet. And also, I just want to point out that she responded to several questions that were posed by members of the Sexual Health Rights and Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Club here at the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policies. And those questions are interwoven in her talk. So we will return to those questions at the end and invite all of your reactions, thoughts, reflections, as well as any of your thoughts that you'd like to share on this Human Rights Day 2020. So without further ado, we're going to listen now to Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng speak to us from Johannesburg. And then afterwards, we will have an open discussion. Thank you for listening. Please make sure all of your that all of you are muted at this time. Thank you.
And good morning, good evening from wherever you are joining us in the world. My name is Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. Everyone just calls me Dr. T or Tlaleng, which is perfectly fine. And it's such a privilege for me to join you all today. And thank you so much, Tulin, for this invitation. I've admired you and followed your work for so many years. So this is really just so important and significant for me personally, but also important for the work. You know, over the years, there has been significant steps, you know, taken towards the realization of sexual and reproductive health rights across the globe. And as a young medical student myself at the time, I remember being quite frustrated at how little human rights we were taught and human rights frameworks made it into a medical curriculum. And it was really following, you know, the work of the International Conference on Population and Development in 1994, and then the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, where I started to read about the different countries globally that had committed and taken steps towards the realization of sexual and reproductive health rights. And that's when my passion and my advocacy really started. And that's what influenced me, being a medical student, being a medic, who has a strong interest in human rights and particularly sexual and reproductive health rights. And I know, as much as it is the case in South Africa, the challenges we face, as well as the Africa region, is almost replicated throughout the world. And the steps, you know, although they have been taken towards achieving some of these important goals, the comprehensive realization of sexual and reproductive health rights still remain a challenge. And in my recent and new role as the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, I know the important work that the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights continue to do in defining the obligations of state parties. And I also think it's important for me, as I fulfill my role in this new role as a Special Rapporteur, to really, you know, involve myself and immerse myself in a lot of the work that academia and research and scholarship that's happening in this area, as well as to assist colleagues as we implement the right to health at the global level, but as well as operationalizing the right to health at national levels. And the history, you know, of sexual and reproductive health rights still is rooted in very androcentric and socio-political systems that are rooted in coloniality, in apartheid, in Afrophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, ableism, and definitely racism. And many countries are still lagging behind with regard to promoting, protecting, and advancing human rights, and particularly sexual and reproductive health rights. Therefore, for all of us, whether we are working in clinical services, in academia, in research, in policy, or in health financing or global health, I think it's important to realize that sexual and reproductive health rights require an intersectional approach that appreciates how multiple systems of oppression interact simultaneously to determine an individual's sexual and reproductive health rights, and that we must adopt an intersectional approach and be unapologetic about it, because we know that where systems and policies and practice continue unchallenged, you find that people who are already marginalized, who are already finding themselves in vulnerable situations, do not enjoy their right to health, and often their freedoms and their entitlements remain marginalized. And so the freedoms, and the right to control one's health, including the right to freedom from violence, and as well as non-consensual medical treatment and experimentation, are really, really important. In South Africa, we are still dealing with the report by the Commission on Gender Equality that's, has investigated and reported that sterilization, forced and coerced sterilization of HIV positive women is a practice that continues to happen in South Africa. And currently in the United States, we are still reading about the reports that are happening on forced and coerced sterilization of people in detention, and those who are, of African descent, and women of color. So we know that the healthcare system is not neutral, and we know that medicine is not neutral. In fact, we need states and all of us to work together to ensure that rights are protected and promoted. And we also, of course, know that we are challenged by a very unequal distribution of power in society, and to strive to restore people's dignity, it's an ideal for me that I take on as I start my mandate, and it's a pivotal principle that permeates the right to health. Dignity is very, very important, and I know firsthand the changes that needs to happen, and the dismantling and a breaking down of these oppressive systems and conditions that make people vulnerable to sexual and reproductive health violations. We must continue to identify them, but also really commit ourselves to project decolonization and democratizing of global health, as well as the anti-racism work that is needed with using intersectional frameworks to reshape, to research, to analyze the current global health architecture. And as per the mandate, of special rapporteurs, sexual and reproductive health is seen as an integral element of the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of both physical and mental health. And my mandate particularly recognizes that many obstacles stand in between individuals and their enjoyment of sexual and reproductive health. And these obstacles are interrelated and are entrenched at operating levels in clinical care, at the level of health systems design and program implementation, as well as the underlying determinants of health. And in addition to biological factors, social and economic factors, we know that women and those folk who are gender non-conforming or who are gender and sexually diverse bear the brunt of sexual and reproductive health violations. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us as civil society, as experts in the field, as academics, to really influence laws and policies, as well as those practice, that they don't lead to rights abuses and violations. And again, as someone who's a medical doctor in South Africa, in the Africa region, I know many approaches that continue to disempower, especially young women, from, and undermine their sexual agency and bodily autonomy, and deny further, transgender women, for example, access to affirming healthcare and information, and how a lot of the heteronormativity in the systems and in the countries that we operate on has led to continued criminalization, of persons of diverse sexualities and gender, and again, continue to infringe on individuals' rights to equality, equity, non-discrimination, privacy, and of course, inherent dignity. And therefore, as a medical doctor, I found it really important for me to understand how, even in my clinical service, how I practice medicine was in itself and is in itself a very important tool to promote and to protect individuals who find themselves in vulnerable situations, who have been historically subjected to discrimination, persons such as adolescent girls, migrant women, women with disabilities, refugees, and people who are gender diverse, and those communities geographically who find themselves, far from urban centers or peri-urban centers, which ordinarily find themselves to be the center of activity where access isn't a problem if you are in the urban communities. But once you move away from these urban centers, we find that access to information, access to services is not always guaranteed. And therefore, whether it's, before, during, or even a public health crisis, like we find ourselves within the COVID-19 crisis, it is important that we place the individuals who are ordinarily marginalized and place them in the center of all of our efforts, and that we make sure that the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of both physical and mental health is protected and promoted. And I think it's incumbent on all of us as scholars, as researchers and practitioners and human rights activists to really advocate for policy change, for policy reform, and an end to criminalization, an end to discrimination, and really demand intersectional frameworks and solutions that do not leave any of us behind. And I know as well, the issue of the global gag rule, because often, we need these experiences and share and learn, across our movements, but also regionally. And one such policy that I have interacted with firsthand, it's the global gag rule, and how in the last several years, we have seen, especially in the developing countries and especially in Africa and South Africa specifically, how this presidential, unilateral policy has had really dire consequences for the provision of abortion care and safe abortion services in South Africa, where information and advocacy activities haven't been supported because of the global gag rule. And what it really means is that, any foreign country that receives US aid in the form of US funding is then restricted from supporting or advocating any policy reforms or giving abortion services. And this has really meant that our primary healthcare systems have been disintegrated and abortion care has been removed. It's almost like a chilling effect that happens, and it takes a while to recover from such enforcement of the global gag rule, as we have seen with the previous, George Bush presidency. At the time, South Africa was responding to the HIV epidemic, and with that came the PEPFAR funding, and many NGOs, which are partners to our national department, had to sign on to not do any work related to abortion care or information advocacy, which really meant that abortion and many women who needed safe abortion and pregnant people who needed safe abortion were unable to get that, despite South Africa having a policy and an act that legalizes and protects our rights to safe abortion. And yet we have seen how US funding was prioritized, and people were made, and organizations were made to sign the clause that the global gag was enforcing, again, leading many people to have unsafe procedures. And in some instances, some people are living with lifelong morbidities and complications, and some people have died from a lack of access to safe abortion. And this is one example how you can have a policy in one area of the world, like the United States, having dire consequences and direct impact on health provision, on health practice in countries such as South Africa. And of course, COVID-19, found us as a global community unprepared, and it showed, existing structural fault lines in terms of health financing and health planning. And initially, I remember reading in the news about how the rest of the world was expecting Africa to be the hardest hit in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how and it could be, of course, an issue of data collection. But we can say at this stage, that the African continent, and of course South Africa, hasn't been hit as severely as the global community had expected. And I perhaps have to talk about the fact that COVID-19 has really resulted in many funds, and a redistribution of human resources, from primary health and especially SRHR related health issues to COVID-19 responses. And perhaps, there's another possible area of research that some of you may find quite interesting, to look into the response of many African countries, including South Africa, around the COVID-19. And I think it's about agility, about how health systems were able to, especially in the early ages, provide information to citizens. I think the fact that for us, COVID-19 remained a healthcare issue, it wasn't politicized as it was in the United States, really did, make sure that the citizens firstly have credible and evidence-based information, but that we trusted, our public servants, and we trusted the health system. And I think it's such an important element, because often when we're talking, in global health, we don't talk enough about the trust that communities and citizens need to have, firstly in their leaders, and secondly in the public health, leadership and the medics that are leading. And I think we see with the United States, unfortunately, the consequences of having politics take over public health. And I think this is a very important lesson for us to learn as we go forward about, supporting the United Nations and other colleagues who are working very hard on universal health access, on issues of HIV/K, on issues of family planning, and how some of the interruptions around access to contraception have really, brought to the fore an important question about why African countries, for example, are still importing commodities such as condoms, about the fact that even before COVID-19, we were seeing stockouts in terms of contraception methods and modern methods, and how, I suppose, as we reimagine a post-COVID-19 world, we need to think about integrating and reintegrating sexual and reproductive health rights, as well as comprehensive access to information and services, especially to those groups who have been identified as those in vulnerable situations, like migrant populations, like young people, and of course, women of color, and African people of African descent globally. And of course, the issues of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence are important. At the beginning of lockdown, and especially in the countries that experience a very strict lockdown, many people were told to stay home. Many institutions of higher learning in South Africa were closed, and people had to go back home. And I remember, even as the work we're doing at the Commission for Gender Equality, we were already at the time raising the alarm that home is not necessarily a safe space for many people. And so the issues of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, remain for me issues of concern, especially the lack of services that are acceptable and dignified for those who survive violence, and those who are victims of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. And it's my vision for my role and my mandate as a special rapporteur to really talk about and remind states, about their responsibilities and obligations when it comes to ending violence firstly, but also then making sure that we have comprehensive and dignified services, psychosocial support, socioeconomic support for those who are survivors of violence, and make sure that long-term there is contingency plans for counseling and mental health support, as many of the survivors of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence have lifelong trauma, and we should be making sure that we have services that are acceptable and accessible. And this is one of the ways that I think it's important for all of us as as a global community to go beyond just the slogans and the campaign days, but to make this a 365-day commitment to ending violence. And my vision for the future, just in closing, for the right to health, it really is about restoration of dignity. It's about recentering the margins. I will be drawing heavily on the work, of course, of Lynn, people like Kimberly Crenshaw, Loretta Ross, women that I have looked on and have learned from in my years as a younger medical student about, the issues of human rights, around reproductive justice, around social justice, around climate justice, about the intersecting issues that affect all of us, and really making sure that the United Nations slogan of leaving no one behind is really something that goes beyond slogans, that it echoes and that it's reflected in my work as a special rapporteur who's looking at the right to health, but also working together with my colleagues and other independent experts like Professor Achume, who's a professor of law at UCLA, to really work at looking at the issues of racism and the health outcomes, and working together with all of you. And I look forward to learning from you. And please share the resources that you have, the work that you are currently embarking upon, that will enrich my work as well as my thematic reports as I take on this very important role. And again, thank you so much, Lynn, for this invitation. It's really been amazing. And I really just, want to appreciate again this time and say good luck for your academic year, for all the work that you continue to do. And I really, really look forward to learning and sharing with all of you in the future. Thank you so much.
Wow, I just feel like taking a moment to pause in appreciation for the talk by the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. And at this time, John, if you would pull up my slides, I'd like to bring up a few of those who've joined us in this space. Okay. And I did want to come back to this slide, actually. In addition to being special rapporteur, Dr. T, as she is fondly known, has written a new book called A Guide to Sexual Health and Pleasure. And I will post information about ordering the book, but I just want to point out that in her role as a medical doctor, she's also really intent on speaking to a very broad population of folks, to lay people, practitioners, clinicians, scholars, researchers, activists alike, as she shared in her talk. So again, that's a valuable resource, and I will post the link for ordering her book. And at this time, I want to introduce to you, well, actually, I think we're just gonna, yes, I will introduce to you the current president, Polly Smith-Faust, if you don't mind turning on your camera. And it was Polly who sent the questions that Dr. Mofokeng responded to in her talk. And she is the current president, but will soon be graduating. She's had a wonderful couple of years with us here. And I just wanted to highlight this. This is a group of students. Their faculty advisor is Dr. Diana Romero, and they have been working for about a year now to sponsor events and host discussions among themselves and with other students around the issues of sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice. This is their mission. And we're going to take a moment now to open the floor to your thoughts, your comments, reactions. We realize there may be many of you who are also working in the field of human rights and activism, and you might have some thoughts, and perhaps Polly will also share her reaction, since she was the one who posed some of the primary questions. Welcome, Polly.
Thank you, Dean Roberts. Yeah, it was really amazing to hear her reactions to the questions I had. I had heard about the gag rule in the past, and I had a friend who had done an internship with the UN, and I think right during the transition from Obama's presidency to Trump's presidency. So she had told me, I think, so 2017 now, that was about the issue of that when there's a Democratic president, the Democratic president reverses the gag rule, and when there's a Republican president, the Republican president reinstates the gag rule. And so it was really wonderful to have this opportunity to directly ask someone who is in one of the countries affected by this, doing the work around this, what the gag rule looks like on the ground, and what that's like. And it really brought to mind issues of ongoing effects of colonization, that kind of this who are we to say what is allowed and not allowed in another country? And the answer is, we are the people with the money, but we only have the money because of the generations of colonization. And this interconnectedness of that the human rights for people in other countries comes down to the way individuals vote. Individuals in swing states vote in the US. Her talk really just highlighted how much misplaced power I think the United States has, and again that interconnectedness.
Thank you for that, Polly. And if anyone else, we have, quite a few people who've joined us, and you can unmute yourself. You can type thoughts, reactions in the chat, or you may just, share what you like. Your reactions, your thoughts. Is that Ansley?
A brief comment, yeah.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Ansley Hobbs. My pronouns are she, her. I'm just reflecting on it, and one of the things that I was really both surprised by and, well, I guess pleasantly surprised by more than anything else was her willingness to speak openly about abortion. I work with many colleagues in sub-Saharan Africa, and I think because of many of the very strict restrictions that many of their governments have on abortion laws, I think that when individuals are working with one another across countries, they often pause when they're speaking about the topic of abortion, because they're unsure how to kind of broach the topic with colleagues from different countries. But when we are when we're looking at sexual and reproductive health, and when we're looking at this global gag rule, it really emphasizes the fact that we need to be a bit more unapologetic about the rights of women in this space. And I just was happy to hear her perspective, and happy to see that she's in such a wonderful position where she can speak to this, and she can represent this topic and the struggle in such kind of a high place with such high esteem. And so it just was, I guess, refreshing for me to see, and I'm just happy to be able to have to listen to that, I guess. So that's all.
Thank you, Ansley. The floor is open. The room, the space is held for you. Any questions about the rapporteur or the mandate, if you've had a chance to open that link? Is there anyone here who is working directly on some of these issues as an advocate, as a researcher, as a practitioner? A quiet group. Had anyone not heard about this position and the role of a special rapporteur for the right to health? And I'm wondering what folks are thinking about in terms of this moment of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the racial injustice pandemic, as well as continuing pandemics such as HIV and AIDS, and also of threats to sexual reproductive health and rights and wellness. From your own
Hello.
experience or lens. Yes, please introduce yourself because we only see the phone number.
Okay, no problem. I'm Terrence. I'm calling in from Chicago. Very serious about, interested in human rights, and I saw this on Eventbrite, so I came to the meeting. And I'm sorry I came late, and I may have missed something that I wanted to ask a question about or mention, and that is, you know, as a Black man, I'm interested in how, as much as I'm interested in just general human rights, period, that oftentimes it just seems like, to me, from my understanding, perspective, and experience, it seems like, you know, racism is left out of that, or has been left out of that a great deal, just historically. So that's been one of my major concerns, and that's one of the reasons why, and again, I'm sorry I'm late, you know, why I came to the meeting, because I just wanted to see, you know, how much that was put forth on the table and discussed.
Yes, well, I thank you. Is it Terry?
Terrence.
Terrence from Chicago. Thank you very much for your comments and for joining us. And yes, Dr. Mofokeng certainly spoke about anti-racism efforts as central to achieving the mandate for a right to health. And everyone who has RSVP'd and joined us today will receive the recording. So whatever you missed, you will be able to listen to and hear in her own words.
Great. I was going to ask for that.
Yes,
Thank you.
and I assure you that she did speak very, very explicitly to that point.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You're most welcome. Okay.
I wanted to say to your question, Dr. Roberts, about the intersecting pandemics, human rights issues, et cetera, and COVID. I'm currently working for the New York State AIDS Institute in the Office of Drug User Health. And so what I had already, and I have this background in working on reproductive justice and reproductive health access. And so I was already working on the opioid epidemic within the AIDS epidemic, and with this knowledge of the reproductive health access, I wouldn't call it an epidemic, but problem. And so just something that's upset me the entire year is how we're already working so hard on, so many people are already working so hard on continuing to fight AIDS and continuing to deal with the ramifications of AIDS being mishandled by the Reagan administration in the 1980s. And then continuing to fight the opioid epidemic and how that was mishandled. most specifically by the Sackler family. And just we're already so tired from working on these things that are so difficult. And so when COVID happened, it just made everything so much worse and made our work so difficult. And just watching my own colleagues in my own department of my own small piece of this whole public health world, just seeing how the people who were doing really great work on bringing medication for opioid use disorder treatment into jails and prisons in New York State, then those specific colleagues were then working on COVID full-time in Westchester. So then it was like, okay, well, what's happening both COVID in prisons and what's happening with opioid use disorder in prisons. And so just this, like, I'm hopeful that the light COVID has brought to public health issues means that there will be more general public health funding, more of a focus on it, more energy put into it. But yeah, we need funding for absolutely everything, not just COVID.
And as someone who cut her teeth on, cut her public health teeth on HIV and AIDS in the early 90s, I will say that was pretty much a sentiment back then too, right? And there were, in some respects, there was a need for heightened attention to HIV AIDS, but HIV AIDS revealed all of the, discriminatory practices, those who were most impacted, being, lacking access, and then fighting for that to heal a fractured, public health system to begin with. At the same time, there's things we've learned from the HIV/AIDS epidemic that, hopefully will not be repeated, but we've already seen that. And so it's kind of a marginalization of the marginalized through COVID. And what it has revealed is a need for us to really re-examine, our healthcare system, our economic systems. So this is the time for intersectional frameworks, as Dr. Mofokeng pointed out. And we've had these frameworks for some time. It's important now for us to be able to support these frameworks in their realization and to integrate them into the systems that keep us compartmentalizing people's health and well-being. So someone who is dealing with an opioid addiction, may also be impacted by COVID and HIV and unemployment and so many other things, but that's what we've needed to do all along. And so ensuring that we have mechanisms in place for addressing all of these issues, even within this providers of care. I remember comparing the state of Washington, which integrated HIV into its healthcare system from the beginning, versus New York, which created a separate, set of services, if you will, out of necessity. But then in hindsight, was that then preventing those services from being integrated into all the other systems of care that we need to provide? And I don't think there's a perfect answer to how we do that, except that we have to find some way to not treat people as merely, disembodied by what they're dealing with, as opposed to feeling as whole human beings who deserve dignity, respect, care, access, economic well-being, social well-being, and the right to express themselves freely without harm and violence. So I think we still, this is the same thing we've been working on for some time, and we keep chipping away, and hopefully with each pandemic that reveals these things more broadly and cause it to be felt more widely, that we can come up with solutions that are just as wide sweeping. And with that, I do want to leave some time for us to hear from some of my colleagues. I'm going to allow Polly to put on her hat as the outgoing president of this club, to reach out to any students who may have joined us and talk a little bit about the club and how you could get involved on our campus. And we realize if you're not a part of our school community, you might be someday. So there may be some prospective, future students. But if you will, just indulge us for a moment.
Sure, absolutely. Would you mind pulling up the slide with the mission of the club? Thank you so much. Yeah, so I had about 12, 13 years of volunteer experience in sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice before I got to SPH. It's why I decided to pursue a public health career, and something I realized I was wanting when I joined the group was I'd lived in Chicago for a while. I was really plugged into a lot of the events, activism, volunteer opportunities, et cetera, in Chicago. And I wanted to do more of that in New York and wanted to have more of find a community to do that with in New York. And then also bring the great activists and people from that world into SPH itself. So we, COVID has interrupted some things, but we are a space for those kinds of conversations to happen. We have had, this is our second event that's gone through. We had another canceled event right at the beginning of everything being shut down. But we worked on bringing in people to speak about these issues who are experts in those issues. And then we also have a Facebook group that I typed into the chat. And that's really our space to just kind of have these conversations. We know that people have all kinds of different schedules. So even when school was an in-person situation, we still did a lot online. And so it's a place where we're sharing links to articles, links to events that come up, different things like that. We're hoping to get some sexual and reproductive justice swag as our last thing we do on our way out, us graduating officers. But then we're hoping to hand over the reins to other people interested in this kind of work. So if you're interested in being an officer, please let me know. If you're interested in joining the group, joining that Facebook, or emailing me. If you don't have a Facebook, I'll type my email into the chat as well. And then kind of as a last call, normally we would have open poster sessions for people graduating to show what their theses were on and what the capstones were on. And so since we didn't do that, I want to invite anyone who is graduating who did a capstone relating to sexual or reproductive health or rights or justice to let me know. And if you're interested, I want to post we did 5-minute videos of our presentations instead of poster sessions where you could walk up and look at a poster. So I'm going to post my own in. Another colleague in my cohort has generously offered to let me post theirs. And so if anyone else wants to share your work in this space, I know I really enjoyed when I was a first year getting to walk around the room and see what people had done. So I want to create a virtual version of that room.
Thank you, Polly.
You're welcome.
And if you could also just, or we'll put in, if you are interested in carrying on the leadership or becoming a member of this club, we'll put in the email for the Graduate Student Government Association, and Polly, only if you're willing to share yours for this interim period. And then next, I would like to introduce to you my colleague and fellow faculty member of the Community Health and Social Sciences Department. And next slide, please, also, if you don't mind, John. Meredith Manzi, because we have a specialization at the school on maternal, child, reproductive, and sexual health, MCRSH, and she can tell you a bit more about if you are interested in our school and studying with us, or if you are already a student and haven't made this decision yet, to learn more about the specialization. Thank you, Meredith. Professor Manzi. And I think, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Roberts. And thank you for organizing this to honor and recognize Human Rights Day. This is really terrific. I just wanted to briefly let anyone in the audience know, if you are a current student or a prospective student, that we have a specialization, as Dean Roberts mentioned, that's focused really on providing master's and doctoral students with both a theoretical understanding that shapes health across the lifespan, specifically related to reproductive and sexual health, and then also the foundation for research and programmatic activities. And this is open to any master's student and any doctoral student. It entails 3 courses and a kind of culminating experience that is for the most part embedded into the curriculum. And there is more information about it on our school's website. You can reach out to Dr. Romero, who is the director, and the link is there, as well as an application process. Everyone is accepted into the program. There are no rejections to the application. It's just a way for us to be able to capture who is in it and to streamline all of our communication to you. So if anyone has any questions on it, I'm happy to take them now, but we have many students in there, and it's part of the draw to the school, I think, and there's many faculty members who work in this space as well. So if it's something that's of interest to you, it's been really great. And I think if you can hear from fellow students who has taken it as well, how productive it's been in terms of training and having on your resume and ready to go when you graduate to be in the field, more of a specialized knowledge in this area.
Thank you, Professor Manzi. And I just also want to point out that we're also joined here by an emeritus professor, Betty Walder-Levin, who also taught as part of the MCRSH specialization, and Diana Romero. Heidi Jones was with us earlier, had to leave earlier. And as I mentioned, Diana Romero is the director of the MCRSH specialization. She is currently on sabbatical, but she is still directing. And so we will put contact information for how to either reach out to a faculty advisor or to Professor Romero. And next, I would like to, if you could advance the next slide, introduce to you all, or reintroduce, she spoke earlier, nsley Hobbs, who is an alum of our school, and she was our class of 2020 valedictorian. And she's going to speak about our Masters of Science program in Global and Migrant Policy, which we think is also relevant to what we've been speaking about on this Human Rights Day.
Thank you, Dean Roberts. Yeah, I just am thinking about, Dr. T bringing up the fact of forced hysterectomies in migrant populations and the immigrant detention centers in the United States, and how this really brings into perspective why, this intersectional understanding and perspective is incredibly important in public health. So this Masters of Science was actually designed for working professionals who would like to come back to this field and understand how they can delve deeper into the world of global and migrant health, how they can understand the current competencies that are required to understand the policies that impact displaced peoples all over the world, to give them a deeper understanding of the different multilateral organizations that impact millions of people on a daily basis, and to really dig deeper into be able to understand how they can advocate and how they can bring better human rights into this global and migrant health world, because I think it's something that we definitely need more focus on. And there are, there's so many different issues that this population faces. And so to have a master's of science that really combines the two, not just looking at global health, but understanding specifically this population of migrant health, is incredibly important, especially as, global populations are forced into more and more displacement with each year. We really need to round out our knowledge of this. This program was designed as an online program for working professionals. And, I know that there are some individuals on this call who are out of state. Another positive benefit of this program is that anyone, regardless of whether or not you live in New York State, is able to get your Master's of Science degree at the in-state tuition rate as well. Since it's online, you're able to work at your own schedule, at your own pace. You're able to incorporate this into your working life and bring those skills and competencies that you're learning in your school into your day-to-day practice as professionals. Obviously, the program is also open to individuals who are coming straight out of an undergraduate degree. Although we really value the perspective that working professionals bring, and it gives us an opportunity to immediately incorporate those skills and competencies into the things that we're doing each and every day. On the slide, you can see some of the curriculum. We do begin with a public health foundation, but then we get more into the the health and the human right paradigms that we're going to be speaking about in the classes, understanding regulation, migration, trade, policy, politics, all of the topics that kind of come together in this intersection. And so if you have any questions at all about the Masters of Science program, please feel free to email me, and I can put you in contact as well with some individuals who are willing to speak even more with you about it, as well as myself. So I'll drop my email in the chat. If anybody has any immediate questions, please feel free to reach out here or via email.
And I realize, thank you so much, Ansley. I realize we're all past the top of the hour. I just wanted to share with you more broadly on that note. Last slide, John, that if you are interested in applying to any of our programs, in particular the MPH or the MS or a certificate program where you can take 5 courses towards that can also, be used towards one of our degree programs. It's pretty simple. You go to this website called SOFIS to a common application. Our deadlines for spring 2021 are through January 1st of next year, and for the fall, March 1st. And we will be hosting an information session about the MS and Global and Migrant Health Policy on January 21st. If you have any questions, you can write to us at admissions@sph.cuny.edu about any of our programs, including the MCRSH specialization, all of our MPH programs, our MS programs, and of course, we also offer a PhD in public health. We also, I will mention, offer now a fully online MPH degree, in addition to the online MS program that Ansley spoke about. So you can study with us from anywhere in the world. And as was mentioned, paying in-state, New York State tuition. So again, on this Human Rights Day, I want to thank you all for coming and for staying a little beyond the time. We appreciate you all for recognizing this as so critical to the well-being of all of us. I hope that you will all be safe, stay well and be safe, and that you found something of use to you in your networks. And if you would like to stay in touch with us, when we write to you with the recording, you can let us know what you're up to and ways in which we can support whatever it is you're doing in the world to support, defend human rights and dignity for all. Again, on this 2020 International Human Rights Day. Thank you for coming.